My phone buzzed with a message from my mother, the first in 5 years. 3 short, entitled words that took my breath away. We had a right. A right? I looked across the grand ballroom, at the glittering chandeliers and the smiling faces of people who had celebrated my success, and I thought back to another empty room. A church, 5 years ago. A row of empty seats where my family should have been. They didn't think I had a right to their presence on my wedding day. And now, after everything, they thought they had a right to be here, at the party celebrating their ruin. A party where I was about to announce that I owned them. Sometimes, the world tells you you're not good enough. Sometimes, it's the people who are supposed to love you the most. This is the story of what happens when you decide to stop listening and start building. If you believe that the best revenge is a life well-lived and a company well-bought, then stick around. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into a story about empty chairs and a life filled to the brim. Part 1. The Empty Pew. It's funny, the things that stick with you. It's not the big, dramatic explosions that leave the deepest scars. It's the silences, the absences. For me, that silence was a whole row of empty seats in a sun-drenched church. The Calebs, my family, were supposed to be in the front left pew. My mother, Eleanor, would have been in a steel gray dress, perfectly tailored, her posture radiating a kind of regal disapproval she'd honed to a fine art. My father, Richard, would be beside her, looking uncomfortable in his suit, a man perpetually caught in the gravitational pull of his wife's ambition. My brother, Mark, and my sister, Chloe, would be flanking them, a united front of familial judgment. But they weren't there. The pew is just polished oak and empty air, a gaping wound in the middle of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The phone call had come 2 nights before the wedding. I remember I was arranging seating cards at our tiny apartment dining table. Ryan was in the kitchen, humming off-key as he practiced piping icing onto a cupcake, a last-minute detail for our modest dessert table. The scent of vanilla and buttercream hung in the air, a sweet, hopeful perfume. My mother's name lit up my phone. I answered with a smile. "Hi, Mom. Just finalizing the seating chart. You're going to love who you're sitting with." Her voice was cold, clipped. The voice she used for firing caterers or negotiating with difficult clients at their prestigious event planning agency, Collins and Company. Events. "Anna, your father, and I need to talk to you." The "we" was always a red flag. It meant she had already made a decision and had convinced my father to fall in line. "Okay," I said, my smile faltering. "Is everything all right?" "It's about this wedding," she said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "We've been doing some thinking, and we cannot, in good conscience, support it." My blood ran cold. The seating card in my hand, for a distant cousin, suddenly felt slick with sweat. "Support it? What are you talking about?" "The wedding is in 2 days." "That's precisely the problem," she continued, her voice devoid of any warmth. "We had hoped you would come to your senses, that you would see this relationship for what it is, a mistake." I could hear my father mumbling in the background. "Eleanor, maybe not now." "Richard, be quiet," she snapped. Then her attention was back on me, sharp as a shard of glass. "Anna, we have a reputation, a standing in this community. The Collins name means something. To have our daughter marry the baker. A man with no prospects, no ambition beyond flour and sugar. It's an embarrassment." The words hit me like physical blows. A baker. She said it like he was a leper. Ryan wasn't just a baker. He was an artist. He'd graduated from one of the top culinary institutes in the country, but he had no trust fund, no family name to leverage. He just had his hands, his talent, and a dream of opening a small, perfect bakery. To my family, that was the equivalent of being a peasant. "His name is Ryan," I said, my voice trembling. "And he's the kindest, most wonderful man I've ever met. His ambition is to build something real, Mom. Something of his own." "Don't be naive," she scoffed. "Kindness doesn't pay the mortgage on a house in the right neighborhood. Kindness doesn't get you a membership at the country club. We've given you every advantage, Anna. A top-tier education, connections, and you're throwing it all away for a man who will have you living paycheck to paycheck your entire life. We will not stand by and applaud your descent into mediocrity. Tears were welling in my eyes, hot and angry. So you're not coming? I whispered, the reality of it finally sinking in. We are not. And neither are Mark or Chloe. They agree with us. This is not the future we envision for you. When you're ready to admit you've made a terrible mistake, we'll be here. Until then, we can't be part of it. The line went dead. I just stood there, phone in my hand, the silence of our small apartment roaring in my ears. The sweet smell of buttercream suddenly made me feel sick. Ryan came out of the kitchen, his face beaming, holding up a perfectly swirled cupcake. What do you think? Too much rosewater? He asked, his smile faltering as he saw my face. Anna? Honey, what's wrong? Explaining it to him was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I watched his face fall, not with anger, but with a deep, profound hurt. He wasn't hurt for himself, but for me. He knew how much I'd craved my family's approval, how I'd spent my entire life trying to live up to the impossible standards set by Collins and company. They think I'm not good enough for you, he said softly, putting the cupcake down. No, I choked out, wrapping my arms around him. They think I'm not good enough to make my own choices. They think my happiness is less important than their reputation. We talked late into the night. We could call it off, he offered. Postpone. Give them time. But I refused. I wouldn't let them have that power. This wedding wasn't about them anymore. It was about us. It was the first official act of our new life, a life we would build on our own terms. The wedding day arrived, bright and painfully beautiful. The sun streamed through the stained glass windows of the old church. Ryan's family, a warm and boisterous crowd of farmers and schoolteachers from the Midwest, filled their side of the aisle completely. They were beaming, their love for Ryan and their acceptance of me a palpable force in the room. My side was a desert. A few loyal friends had come, huddled together in the second and third rows as if for warmth, their presence a small, defiant comfort. But that front pew, it was a black hole. As I walked down the aisle on the arm of Ryan's father, a man who had welcomed me with more paternal warmth in 6 months than my own father had in 26 years, I couldn't take my eyes off it. Every step I took, that empty space seemed to mock me. It screamed of rejection, of conditional love, of a family who had valued their brand over their blood. I saw the pity in some of the guests' eyes. I saw the confusion. I saw my own reflection in the polished wood, a bride with only half a family. That moment burned itself into my memory. It wasn't just sadness. It was a cold, clarifying rage. It was the moment I understood that I was truly, completely on my own. As I reached the altar and took Ryan's hand, I made a silent vow. It wasn't just to him. It was to myself. I would build a life so full, so successful, so undeniably happy, that their absence would become nothing more than a footnote in my story. They had drawn their line in the sand, based on their definition of success. Fine. I would redefine the entire damn landscape. The reception was small but full of love. We laughed, we danced, we ate the cake Ryan had lovingly baked himself. But even in the midst of the joy, the ghost of that empty pew lingered. It followed me home, a silent passenger in our beat-up sedan. It sat with us in our tiny apartment as we opened our modest wedding gifts. That night, lying in bed next to my new husband, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the apartment felt different now. It wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a door being slammed shut. The sound of being cut off. Are you okay? Ryan whispered in the dark, sensing my turmoil. I will be, I said, my voice quiet but firm. They think your dream is small. They think our life will be small. I turned to face him, the faint glow of a streetlight tracing the outline of his jaw. Let's prove them wrong, I said. Let's build something so big it eclipses everything they stand for. He pulled me closer, his embrace a fortress. We don't have to prove anything to them, Anna. I know, I whispered, burying my face in his chest. This isn't for them. This is for us. But deep down, in a secret, vengeful corner of my heart, I knew that wasn't entirely true. A part of it, a very big part of it, would always be for them. It was a promise forged in the fire of their rejection, a promise that one day they would look at what we had built and understand the magnitude of their mistake. They just wouldn't be invited to the celebration. Part 2: Flour, Sweat, and Balance Sheets. The 5 years that followed my wedding were a blur of 3 a.m. alarms, the perpetual dusting of flour on every surface of our lives, and the acrid smell of burnt sugar that signaled a costly mistake. We poured every penny of our savings, every ounce of our energy, into our first bakery. We named it the Rising Sun, a small, private joke between us. My family worshipped their company, Collins and Company. We would worship our sun, our rising bread, our future. The first year was brutal. It was a baptism by fire, debt, and exhaustion. Ryan was the heart of the operation, his hands crafting magic from simple ingredients. I was the brain, hunched over a laptop at a tiny desk shoved into a corner of the kitchen, battling spreadsheets and negotiating with suppliers who saw us as a risky bet. There were nights I'd fall asleep on the keyboard, only to be woken by Ryan gently draping a blanket over my shoulders, his own face etched with fatigue. "We're going to make it, right?" I'd ask him, my voice thick with sleep and doubt. "We are," he'd always say, with a certainty that felt like an anchor in a storm. One perfect croissant at a time. My family made their disapproval a constant, low-grade hum in the background of my life. There were no phone calls, no olive branches. Instead, their judgment came in passive, exquisitely cruel ways. About 6 months in, I ran into my sister, Chloe, at a high-end grocery store. I was in my work clothes, a flour-dusted apron thrown over a worn-out t-shirt, my hair a messy bun. She was immaculate, dressed in designer athleisure wear, her cart filled with organic kale and imported cheese. She looked me up and down, a flicker of something between pity and disgust in her eyes.
"Anna."
"Goodness, you look tired." "It's a lot of work, running a business," I said, trying to keep my voice even.
"Right."
"Your little baking project," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Mom was saying she hopes you're at least keeping up with your retirement savings. You know how these passion projects can fizzle out." The condescension was suffocating. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her about the line of customers we had every morning, about the local food blogger who had called Ryan's sourdough transcendent. But I just smiled, a tight, painful stretch of my lips. "We're doing just fine, Chloe. Thanks for the concern." I walked away, my hands shaking, feeling that familiar sting of being looked down upon. They saw my life's work as a little project, a quaint hobby that would inevitably fail, proving them right. Their worldview was so insular, so obsessed with a specific brand of glossy, corporate success, that they couldn't comprehend the value in what we were building. Collins and Company. Events planned galas for the city's elite. They dealt in champagne towers, ice sculptures, and guest lists that read like a who's who of the financial district. We dealt in the simple, profound joy of a warm loaf of bread on a Sunday morning. To them, there was no comparison. There were moments of despair. A year in, a major oven broke down right before a huge catering order. The repair cost was more than we had in our business account. I remember sitting on the cold kitchen floor at 2 a.m., crying out of sheer frustration, while Ryan frantically called every 24-hour repair service in the city. We ended up taking a high-interest loan just to stay afloat. That week, we lived on unsold bread and black coffee. It felt like we were one bad day away from losing everything. During that dark time, a letter arrived. It was on thick, cream-colored cardstock, embossed with the familiar Collins and Company logo. It wasn't a letter of support. It was an invitation to my father's 60th birthday party. A lavish affair, naturally, planned by my mother. At the bottom, in my mother's elegant script, was a handwritten note. "We hope you will consider this an opportunity to reconnect. P.S. Please, do not bring a cake. The catering is handled." The calculated cruelty of that postscript was her masterpiece. It was a reminder of my station, a jab at our livelihood, a clear signal that what we did was not welcome in their world. I threw the invitation in the trash. We sent a polite, professionally printed card from a drugstore and a modest gift certificate to his favorite steakhouse. We received no thank you. But slowly, painstakingly, things began to turn. Our reputation grew. One bakery became two, then three. The little project was becoming a local phenomenon. The turning point came when the most luxurious hotel in the city, the Grand Alistair, a frequent client of Collins and Company, approached us. They wanted an exclusive contract to provide all their baked goods, from the breakfast croissants to the dinner rolls. The negotiations were tough. I spent weeks preparing, poring over our cost-benefit analyses, our production capacity, our distribution logistics. I walked into that boardroom in a power suit I'd bought on clearance, my heart hammering against my ribs. I sat across from seasoned executives, men and women my parents would have fawned over at one of their parties. And I nailed it. I walked out with a contract that would quintuple our annual revenue. That night, Ryan and I didn't go to a fancy restaurant to celebrate. We bought a cheap bottle of champagne and drank it sitting on the floor of our original bakery, the smell of yeast and victory in the air. We were exhausted, but we were winning. As our success grew, the whispers from my family's world changed. The pity turned to a kind of confused curiosity. I heard through the grapevine from one of the few cousins who hadn't completely cut me off that my brother, Mark, had been particularly dismissive. "It's a fluke," he'd apparently said at a family dinner. "The artisan fad. It won't last. They have no real business acumen. Dad and Mom built a legacy. They're just playing in a sandbox." Mark was being groomed to take over Collins and Company. He had the corner office, the title, and all the arrogance that came with it. He believed, as my parents did, that true success was inherited, not earned in a hot kitchen. It was this dismissal, this perpetual underestimation, that kept the cold fire in my belly alive. They couldn't see our success for what it was because it didn't fit their narrative. Their narrative required me to fail, so they could sweep in, say, "I told you so," and rescue me from my own poor choices. My success was an inconvenient truth they simply chose to ignore. Around the fourth year, the first crack in their perfect facade appeared. I was scrolling through a local business journal online, a habit I'd picked up to track market trends, when I saw a small article. Collins and Company. Events sued by major vendor for non-payment. My breath caught in my throat. It was a brief piece, but it detailed a significant dispute over a six-figure invoice for a corporate gala. A knot of something dark and exhilarating tightened in my stomach. I started digging. Public records, financial blogs, whispers from contacts I'd made in the hospitality industry. A picture began to emerge. My father's conservative approach to business was being overridden by my mother's extravagant spending and Mark's reckless, flashy ideas. They were overleveraged, chasing bigger and bigger clients while mismanaging their cash flow. They were a company built on image, and the image was starting to crack. I didn't say anything to Ryan at first. It felt like a dark, secret indulgence. I created a private file on my computer, a digital scrapbook of their decline. Every bad review, every notice of a lien, every rumor of a lost client, I saved it. I watched them from a distance, a silent predator tracking a wounded animal. The struggle of our early years had forged me into something harder, sharper than the person I used to be. The girl who cried over that phone call was gone. In her place was a woman who understood balance sheets, who knew how to read a contract, and who had learned, in the most painful way possible, that love and family could be just as transactional as business. One evening, after putting the finishing touches on a proposal for our own citywide distribution center, I found an article announcing that a significant block of shares in Collins and Company, held by a retiring junior partner, was up for a private sale. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat in my chest. This was it. This was more than just an opportunity for Schadenfreude. This was a door swinging open. They had built their entire world on the foundation of that company, the same company they used as a weapon to justify casting me out. And in that moment, seeing the notice of that share sale, I didn't feel a shred of pity for their impending collapse. I felt the cold, thrilling certainty of an apex predator that has just caught the scent of its prey. The game was about to change, and I was finally in a position to write the rules. Part 3. The Ghost in the Machine. The decision to buy their company wasn't a single lightning bolt of inspiration. It was a slow-creeping dawn I watched from the window of my new office, an office that overlooked the very downtown skyline where Collins and Company had reigned for 2 decades. The idea started as a whisper, a dark fantasy, a way to pass the sleepless nights when the adrenaline of our own company's growth kept me awake. But with the news of that retiring partner's shares, the fantasy began to crystallize. It took on weight, structure, a blueprint. My first step was secrecy. Absolute, impenetrable secrecy. This couldn't be me, Anna Caleb, the baker's wife, buying into the family empire. It had to be a ghost, a phantom entity that would arouse no suspicion. I spent a month consulting with a corporate lawyer, a sharp, discreet woman named Ms. Albright who specialized in silent acquisitions. She had a reputation for being a shark, and that's exactly what I needed. You want to acquire a controlling interest in a privately held company without the majority shareholders, your family, knowing who the buyer is until it's too late. She asked in our first meeting, a single eyebrow raised. There was no judgment in her tone, only professional curiosity. That's correct, I said, my voice steady. She leaned back in her leather chair. This will be expensive. And complicated. We'll need to set up a holding company, probably out of state. We'll use proxies to purchase the shares. It's a game of shadows, Ms. Caleb. Are you prepared for that? I've spent the last 5 years preparing, I replied. We established Viridian Holdings, LLC. It was a name with no connection to me, to baking, to anything in my life. It was a sterile, corporate shell, a ghost in the financial machine. Our first move was to purchase the retiring partner's 15% stake. We paid a premium, ensuring the sale was fast and quiet. The transaction went through without a ripple. To my family, it would have just looked like an anonymous investment firm saw a potential turnaround opportunity. I told Ryan what I was doing a week after the first purchase was finalized. I laid out the plan on our kitchen island, the same place where we'd once mapped out the floor plan for our first tiny bakery. He listened silently, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, a long silence hung between us. This isn't about the money, is it? He finally asked, his voice soft. No, I admitted. It's about the empty pew. He nodded slowly, his eyes meeting mine. He saw the unhealed wound, the part of me that was still that bride standing alone. Okay, he said, placing his hand over mine. I'm with you. Let Viridian Holdings burn it all down. His support was my final confirmation. We were in this together, just like we'd always been. The next 6 months were a masterclass in patience and precision. I became a financial predator. I learned that Collins and Company was drowning in debt, using one loan to pay off another. They had lost 2 of their biggest clients due to Mark's arrogance and my mother's refusal to modernize their services. Their reputation for excellence was fraying, replaced by whispers of incompetence. Their desperation made them vulnerable. I knew, from my research, that another junior partner was disgruntled. He felt Mark was running the company into the ground. Through a proxy, an investment banker hired by Ms. Albright, Viridian Holdings made him an offer he couldn't refuse for his 10% stake. He sold without a second thought, happy to cash out before the ship sank completely. Now I held 25%. I was a significant minority shareholder, but still a ghost. The beauty of it was that my family wouldn't have seen these 2 sales as a coordinated attack. They would have seen them as rats leaving a sinking ship, replaced by an opportunistic but silent investor. Their pride wouldn't let them see the truth. The real challenge was acquiring the final block of shares I needed for a controlling interest. The remaining 75% was split between my parents, 50%, and Mark, 25%. They would never sell to an outsider, willingly. But I discovered their Achilles heel, the massive loan they had taken out 2 years prior to fund a lavish and ultimately disastrous expansion into the luxury wedding market, an attempt to compete with newer, trendier firms. The loan was with a smaller, regional bank, and it was secured by the company itself. All of Collins and Company was the collateral. and they were about to default. Through Viridian, I didn't buy their shares. I bought their debt. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating financial move of my life. I leveraged a significant portion of our own company's capital. It was a huge risk. If my family somehow rallied, found another investor, and paid off the loan, Viridian would just be a lender that got its money back. But I was betting on their pride. I was betting they were too proud to admit how much trouble they were in, even to each other. The day the notice of default was issued was a Tuesday. I knew the certified letter would be arriving at their gleaming downtown office. I could picture the scene perfectly. My mother's composure cracking, my father's face turning pale, Mark insisting he could fix it. For 2 weeks, there was silence. I imagined the frantic calls, the desperate meetings. Ms. Albright informed me they were trying to secure another loan to cover the default, but with their financials in shambles, no one would touch them. They were trapped. Then came the call I had been waiting for. It was from the bank, but it was on my behalf. The bank was legally obligated to inform the debtor that their debt had been sold to a third party, Viridian Holdings. And Viridian was now calling the loan. They had 10 business days to pay the full amount, plus penalties, or Viridian would seize the collateral. The collateral that was the company. The final piece of the puzzle was a small, overlooked clause in the company's founding charter. It stipulated that in the event of a forced seizure of assets to cover debt, the seized shares would first be offered for private purchase to existing shareholders before being liquidated publicly. I was an existing shareholder, the ghost in their machine. Ms. Albright handled the final transaction. Viridian Holdings formally seized my father's 50% stake to satisfy the debt. Then, as a 25% shareholder, Viridian exercised its right to purchase those seized shares at fair market value. The day the papers were signed, Ms. Albright called me. "It's done," she said, her voice calm as ever. Viridian Holdings now owns 75% of Collins and Company. Events. You have a controlling interest. Congratulations, Ms. Caleb. You own your family's company. I hung up the phone and walked to the window of my office. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Down below, the lights of the city were beginning to twinkle. One of those lights was their office. My office. I didn't feel a surge of triumphant joy. I felt a quiet, profound sense of calm. A click, as if a piece of my soul that had been dislocated for 5 years had just snapped back into place. The power wasn't in owning the company. The power was in the reveal. Owning it was just the means to an end. The real victory would be the look on their faces when they realized who held the strings. But they wouldn't find out from a lawyer's letter. They would find out on my terms, in my arena. I turned to Ryan, who had been sitting quietly in my office, waiting. "It's time to plan a party," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "A big one. The kind of party Collins and Company would have killed to plan. And we're going to need the best events team in the city." The irony was delicious. I was about to become their biggest client and their new boss, all at the same time. The performance was about to begin, and I had written a starring role for myself. They wouldn't get an invitation, but I knew they would hear about it. The whole city would. Part 4. The announcement and the aftermath. The party was a masterpiece of calculated extravagance. We booked the Crystal Ballroom downtown, a venue known for its 2-story Palladian windows and ceilings that dripped with antique chandeliers. It was the kind of place my mother had always spoken of with a hushed reverence, a pinnacle of old money elegance that Collins and Company had booked for their most elite clients. Now it was mine for the night. I used my newfound position as the silent majority owner of Collins and Company to my advantage. I called a meeting with the senior management team, pointedly excluding my family for the time being. I introduced myself not as Anna Caleb, but as a representative of Viridian Holdings, the new ownership. I was a stranger to them, a crisp, professional woman in a dark suit who spoke their language of logistics and bottom lines. Viridian wants to announce its arrival in the city with a signature event, I told them, watching their anxious faces. "We want to host a party that will be the talk of the town. It will be a celebration of success, innovation, and the future of business in this city. And we want Collins and Company to plan it. This is your chance to show the new ownership what you're capable of." It was the perfect Trojan horse. For the next month, they worked tirelessly to impress their new, anonymous boss. They poured all their remaining talent and energy into planning my party. My party. I approved every detail, from the string quartet playing modern pop songs to the champagne tower that rivaled the ones in their old press photos. I selected the caterer, a new, hot restaurant that had recently unseated one of my mother's old favorites. Every choice was a subtle, deliberate twist of the knife. The guest list was my magnum opus. I invited everyone. The CEO of the hotel that gave us our first big break. The food bloggers and journalists who had championed our bakeries. The bankers who had believed in us, the suppliers who had given us a chance. I invited the city's new money, the tech entrepreneurs and the artists, the very people my family's snobbery had always excluded. I invited the world that Ryan and I had built. And from my family's world, I invited only their rivals, their former clients, and the junior partners who had sold me their shares. It was a room filled with every ghost of their failure and every monument to my success. The night of the party, I stood beside Ryan at the entrance, greeting our guests. He was handsome in a tailored tuxedo, his smile easy and genuine. I wore a backless, emerald green gown, a color of money and envy. I had never felt more powerful. The room buzzed with energy, a symphony of clinking glasses, laughter, and music. Cameras flashed. The air smelled of expensive perfume and success. Halfway through the night, the band leader quieted the music, and all eyes turned to the stage. This was the moment. I walked up the steps, the microphone feeling cool and solid in my hand. A spotlight found me, and the room fell into a hush. I looked out at the sea of faces, friends, colleagues, partners. The people who had seen us, believed in us, and celebrated with us. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the grand hall. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight. 5 years ago, my husband and I started a small business with little more than a dream and a mountain of debt." A warm, appreciative laugh rippled through the crowd. We were told that dream was too small, that our definition of success was quaint. We were told that what we were building had no real value. But I look out at this room tonight, and I see the value. It's in your partnership, your support, and your friendship. You are the community that helped our little project grow into something truly special. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I could feel Ryan's eyes on me, full of love and pride. Our company, the Rising Sun Bakery Group, is thriving. And because of that, we've been able to look for new opportunities, new ways to grow. And tonight, I have one more piece of news to share. An announcement about a new acquisition. A murmur of intrigue spread through the ballroom. I let the silence stretch for a beat, savoring the anticipation. It's a company with a long history in this city. A company known for planning the most exclusive events. A company whose name was once synonymous with prestige. I took a breath, my eyes sweeping the room, imagining my family hearing these words. As of this week, I am the new majority owner and CEO of Collins & Company. Events. A collective gasp went through the room, sharp and audible. It was followed by a split second of stunned silence, and then an eruption of applause. It was thunderous, a wave of shock and excitement and congratulations that washed over me. People were on their feet, glasses raised. They understood. They knew the stories, the whispers of my family's disapproval. They saw the poetic, brutal justice of it all. I raised my own glass, my smile never wavering, and met Ryan's gaze. He was grinning, his eyes shining. We had done it. The rest of the night was a whirlwind. People crowded around me, offering congratulations, their eyes wide with a delicious sense of drama. The news spread through the city's elite like wildfire. I was no longer just Anna, the baker's wife. I was the woman who had quietly, brilliantly, bought her family's legacy right out from under them. The next morning, my phone, which had been silent from my family for 5 years, began to buzz incessantly. It was a cacophony of their rage and disbelief. My brother, Mark, was first. His text was a string of furious, typo-ridden sentences. How could you do this? You went behind our backs. This was supposed to be mine. You have no idea how to run this company. You're going to destroy Dad's legacy. Then my sister, Chloe. I can't believe you. After everything Mom and Dad did for you. This is so cruel, Anna. So vindictive. And finally, the message I had been waiting for. My mother. It was short, a perfect encapsulation of her breathtaking entitlement. We heard about your party. Why didn't you invite us? We had a right to be there. I stared at her words, the sheer audacity of them. We had a right to be there. All the pain, all the humiliation of my wedding day coalesced into a single, sharp point. The empty pew. The cold phone call. The years of being treated like a disappointment. My fingers moved across the screen, my movements calm and deliberate. I created a group message with my mother, my father, Mark, and Chloe. I typed one single reply. 10 simple words that held the weight of the last 5 years. That's exactly what you did on my wedding day. I pressed send. And then I blocked their numbers. All of them. A profound silence filled my home. It wasn't the roaring, empty silence of my wedding day. It was a peaceful, cleansing quiet. The silence of a debt paid. The silence of a long, heavy chapter finally, blessedly, coming to an end. For the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly free. The victory wasn't in owning their company. That was just a pile of assets and liabilities I would either salvage or dissolve. The true victory was in the silence. It was in the knowledge that I no longer needed their approval, their validation, or even their anger. I had built my own world, my own success, my own family with Ryan. They hadn't just skipped my wedding. They had underestimated my resilience. And now, they had lost the right to be a part of my life, a life that turned out to be bigger, brighter, and more successful than anything they could have ever planned. It's been a year since that night. I ended up restructuring Collins and Company, merging its best assets with our own growing hospitality division, and letting go of the toxic parts, including the name. We built something new from the rubble. My family is no longer a part of the city's business landscape. I hear about them sometimes, whispers of their fall from grace. They sold their big house. They live a much quieter life now, a life stripped of the prestige they valued more than their own daughter. I don't hate them. I don't feel much of anything for them anymore. They are ghosts from a past life. My revenge was never about destroying them. It was about freeing myself. It was about proving to myself that their definition of worth was meaningless. My worth isn't measured in stock prices or country club memberships. It's measured in the warmth of my husband's hand in mine, the scent of fresh bread in the morning, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I built my own damn throne. They chose an image over love. And in the end, that's all they have left. An old, faded photograph of a family that chose to be absent when it mattered most. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt underestimated or told that your dreams weren't big enough, I hope this gives you a little bit of fire. The most powerful justice comes from building a life so full that there's no room left for those who tried to tear you down. What did you think of this revenge? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served. Until next time.